Well, welcome to our virtual expert series. Today we have Dr. Susan Fritz with the University of Nebraska. Susan?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it's a pleasure to be participating in this series. To give you some background, I currently serve as the Interim Executive Vice President and Provost and Dean of the Graduate College at the University of Nebraska. The topics that we're going to be covering today are on the second slide. You'll notice I've titled my presentation "In the Process of Becoming," and I'll address that briefly. I'll give you a brief overview of my line of inquiry, then share some advice for obtaining funding, and then close with the top 10 tips for success. Next slide. So on this slide, you'll see that I have a book called First Generation College Students, and I'll get back to that in a moment, but I am just struck by the similarities with that book and my experience. I am a native Nebraskan. I am a farmer's daughter and a very proud farmer's daughter. I'm also a first-generation college student. I have all three of my degrees from the same institution, and some of you have been cautioned about that through your careers, and I think those cautions are merited. I didn't have the option to move when I pursued my graduate education. My undergraduate is in business administration and accounting. My master's is in ag education and adult education, and then I completed a PhD in community and human development. Now, you may be asking why I couldn't move. Well, by the time I pursued my master's degree, my husband and I had 3 children, and he is a Nebraska farmer with a good-sized operation, and I was very much committed to maintaining my personal and professional life and trying to hold those together. And so I decided to do what I once read about in a Hallmark card, and that was bloom where you're planted. And so I decided to blossom as much as possible. Now, I will tell you that this conscious decision led me to try to be an extraordinary graduate student. I was a lead PI on a USDA challenge grant. I led the writing of a textbook, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. I competed and received several large state grants, and then I published, taught as much as possible, and I tried to start developing a national network. And I think all of that served me very well when I was eventually invited back after a national search in a tenure leading position. Let's go back to my comment about first generation college students. You know, all of us are being challenged across the United States to not only increase the college going rate, but to also increase the number of students who not only go, but also complete degrees. And so I've been doing a fair amount of reading in that direction. And one of the books I picked up by Ward, Siegel, and Davenport is called First Generation College Students. And, you know, I have to tell you, for those of you that are listening that are first generation college students, this book really helped me understand what happened to me during my undergraduate experience. I really did not quite grasp why so many other people seemed to get the context better than I did. I was able to do the work in the classroom, assuredly, but the social context and the decision making and the support and the friends and family who didn't quite understand what it meant to go to college and how one even goes about that, and how challenging it can be, and how fulfilling, and how you can start to become someone else. And, you know, and sometimes that's threatening to the ones that love us and know us as a child, and perhaps know us as that high school friend. And as we start to branch out and become into that next stage of life and really become the value added we hope everyone experiences in a college career, there starts to be the potential for some dissonance. And so if you are a first-generation student or had been a first-generation college student, I encourage you to take a look at this book by Lee Ward, Michael Siegel, and Zebulon Davenport. When I read this book recently, I was absolutely surprised at how much I related to the information that was provided in it. And it really helped me understand some of the challenges that I faced when I did go to college. think academically I didn't have any problems, but contextually I just didn't seem to quite understand the culture, and people seemed to just be a little more savvy around me than I was. And I've come to figure out now that some of that was related to the fact that I was the first generation college student, and I was kind of the stereotypical student according to the results in this book that are reported. So take a look at that, but also consider what this means for the success of young people today, because I think they probably are dealing as first generation students with challenges that were far greater than I had 30 plus years ago. Next slide, please. So just to review a bit about what I refer to as my checkered past, if one looks at my professional trajectory, I started out in industry. I was a human resources assistant, and I dealt with roughly 1,000 employees at a major facility, and it was a pork plant of all things. And so, I came to realize very quickly how privileged my life had been and how hard people were working. And I think I made a difference there, and I really appreciated that experience, and it really helped ground me in how tough life can be. Then I went on to graduate school and eventually came on board as an assistant, associate, then full professor, moved through the ranks here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I was invited by a colleague to consider being the interim department head when we were involved in a national search. I did that as an associate professor, and then eventually was promoted to full professor. And thanks to Dr. Chris Townsend at Texas A&M, who informed me that I was the first female department head of an ag ed department in the country at that time. It was surprising, but I'm really happy to say that was not just a blip on the radar screen, as we say, that there have been other females who have come into these roles, and I think we've been making a difference in the profession ever since. I also served as the Associate Dean for the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources. I eventually was the Associate Vice Chancellor for the Institute of Ag and Natural Resources here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I did a 2-year stint as the Interim Dean of the Agricultural Research Division, a huge operation with about 40,000 acres of research land, several hundred tenure leading faculty, about an $83 million budget. And after 2 years, we were finally able to hire someone. We were involved in a national search. In fact, I was chairing that search, desperately trying to find the right person for what I thought was a golden opportunity. And I'm pleased that we were able to hire someone. Then I made the conscious decision to find out what it's like to be a leader at a system level in higher education. And so I sought a position as Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs at the NU system, the University of Nebraska system, where we have about 51,000 students, 4 campuses, including a medical center, a metropolitan campus in Omaha, a fairly rural campus in Kearney, Nebraska, and then a much smaller 2-year campus, which would make it 5 if you're counting. But we usually talk about our 4 major campuses, and that 5th campus is Nebraska College of Technical Agriculture. Then August 15th of last year, our provost went back to the faculty to do what I call a teach out as she transitions into retirement. And we were in the midst of a national search for a provost. We are still in the midst of a national search. And I've been asked by the president if I would step in and be the interim executive vice president and provost, who in our system also is the dean of the graduate college. So unfortunately, I don't have someone hired as the associate vice president, my other role. So I certainly don't have to confer very long with myself when I make decisions. However, I also don't have someone I can delegate to on a regular basis. So it gets a little exciting. I will say, though, that all along the way, as I transitioned in these various positions, I was very careful to do what I call taking care of business. If someone were to look at my CV, I believe they would find that I am a serious scholar. I have either been a PI or co-PI on over $6 million worth of grants. I have over 50 refereed journal articles. I continue to publish. I have 2 publications with colleagues under consideration for publication now. I have 2 international presentations. One I'll do at Oxford University next month, and another likely to, I'm hoping, get accepted in South Africa in May. I was a Fulbright Senior Specialist last spring. I was at the University of Zagreb in Croatia. I most recently served as a Baldrige Evaluator for the U.S. Department of Commerce, and I am a North Central Higher Learning Commission Evaluator. So I have tried to combine my interest in evaluation and student learning, as well as strategic planning in higher ed, to serve in those last 3 capacities: Fulbright Senior Specialist, Baldrige Evaluator, and North Central Higher Learning Commission Consultants Evaluator. And I understand I'm just one of a handful of people that have both been trained as a Baldrige Evaluator and a North Central Evaluator. So let's talk a little bit about my research here quickly. For many years, I had the privilege of working with my colleague, John E. Barbuto. Some of you may know Dr. Barbuto, nicknamed Jay. Jay's now in California, faculty at a major university there. But while his time at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, he and I had a collaborative project that was supported through the Nebraska Experiment Station. And let me just talk a little bit about that project. First of all, I would say that one of the strengths of that project was the fact that Dr. Barbuto and I were excellent collaborators, and we also included other people in our project. And you may be asking yourself, how do you select a good collaborator? You know, what are the signs? And so I'll share a few with you that come to mind very quickly. One of them is that you're drawn together by a common interest in a research question, because I think that common interest will hold you together, and it's kind of the glue that binds the relationship. I also think that a good collaborator is somebody who has a different set of strengths from you. For instance, I am very interested in writing. I'm very interested in research design when it comes to putting together a research project. I am also fascinated by the use of statistics, and I absolutely love to churn on things. And Dr. Barbuto has some of those same attributes, by the way. But when he and I collaborate, it's just almost electric. We used to shut the door and we would write together. And I would be at the keyboard and he would talk and I would talk and we would write. And it was just so much fun. And we would generally consider that play, not work. The other thing that I'll tell you is look to engage yourself with people who are busy, because busy people generally really do get things done. They're busy for a reason. If they've got a lot of time on their hands, they're probably not being as productive as they could be, and they may not end up being the collaborator you hope for. The other thing that I will say is look to collaborate with people who are a little anxious, a little curious. Around here we often talk about they have the fire in the belly. You've probably heard that phrase before, but you know, there's just a desire there that can really drive and create momentum among the team. Very, very important. So let's look at the next slide where I've pulled out one title from many that Dr. Barbuto and I published. And I think this article, at least the team, gives you a pretty good idea and maybe some talking points here. The team, Dr. Barbuto and I, of course, we were the conceptualizers on the research. The third individual, Gina Matkin, Dr. Gina Matkin is now on the faculty at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She was a very inquisitive, ambitious graduate student who had a curiosity about her that was just marvelous and follow-through that was exemplary and just like to work with. And in fact, she and I worked on several projects together, as did Dr. Barbuto. And then D.B. Marks is actually David Marks, who is a statistics professor here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And he helped us tremendously as we looked at our design and our analyses with our various parts of our study. And it was just very rewarding to have him as part of the team. Now, I will also say that oftentimes we were very strategic in the way that we looked to publish articles. We thought it was important to contribute to the conversation within ag education and ag education journals related to leadership. But at the same time, we were certainly cognizant that the primary or the foundational discussions generally were occurring in disciplines that I consider to be the base disciplines that we draw from in ag education. So when you look at my publications, you'll see that we published in the Journal of Sex Roles, as this one is. This was a gender-related article, and so we thought it made perfect sense to go out and contribute to that conversation and extend the research in that area. And I think that is something that all of us should strive to do. It's important to publish in our ag education-related journals, assuredly. But I think it is also important to demonstrate to our colleagues and to the wider set of colleagues that we have across our institutions that we can contribute in that space and that we do on a regular basis, and that we don't just talk to ourselves and we just don't cite our own literature within our own, what I will say, our applied journals. Okay, a little bit about funding. I will say that it is not easy, by and large, to obtain large grants in the social sciences. Now, that probably is a little unpopular to say, but I think there are those out there that will agree with me. It is difficult to go it alone if you're going to try and obtain that funding. However, I had a lot of success in working with my colleagues in nutrition science, agronomy and horticulture, modern languages, really branching out. And it started by getting to know them, getting to know what their research questions were, and then looking at complementarity that we had between my interests and my team's interests and their interests. And we were able to build some research partnerships that were definitely mutually beneficial. But it was important on the front end, and I would encourage you to consider this in your careers. Always clearly articulate what you will do and what you hope to get out of that relationship. I will specifically focus on two things that are hot buttons for me. It is important that you have a clear understanding and you articulate that understanding of what position you're going to have if you're going after a grant. Are you going to be the lead PI or are you going to be the co-PI? And then what are you going to contribute to the development of that grant proposal? And what will you have to work with out of that grant project so that you can achieve the outcomes that are specific to you as you look at that proposal? The other thing that I will say is the same kind of conversation needs to happen with order of publication. I had a situation, and I hope you never run into this, where there was a misunderstanding about who was going to be lead author. I was the conceptualizer. I had already initiated some of the data collection, and I actually had to have a frank conversation with someone who really thought that it was that person's turn to have to be lead author. And the reality was, when it came down to contributions that were made, if one looked at the APA book, which is the touch point on this, it was pretty clear who should have been the lead author. The other thing that I will say is be careful if it's very important in your promotion and tenure process to pursue funding that directly contributes to your research agenda, that you just that. If you get too far afield, I would say that you start to get out to mix metaphors on thin ice, and I don't think that's what anybody wants for you to have happen. So at least try to bring in some dollars. Perhaps you can't always bring them in funded projects, and right now with the fairly tenuous climate in D.C., that's clearly going to be a challenge for many of our colleagues who are in the promotion and tenure process. But there are other ways to bring money in. We did an awful lot of data collection through workshops that we offered, and we were able to bring in some money as a result of those workshop offerings and bring in some data. So they were really kind of home run situations. And we had the good fortune to be able to count that just as we would other external dollars that were brought in. Granted, they did not have overhead attached to them, which is really important. And as someone who's been a research dean, I know the importance of overhead and building infrastructure. So don't bury the needle on this. I mean, look at a mix, but it is possible, I hope. You need to have that conversation with the people in your promotion and tenure decision tree, whether that really counts for you. Now, I'd like to switch over to those top 10 tips for success. The first one is one that you should remember every day, and I can't underscore the importance of this enough. And I think you heard a bit about this if you listened to Tracy Hoover's presentation. Be honest. Your integrity is everything. We need to always tell people the truth. It is the key, it is the absolute key to success. I would also say that it is important, all of us at some points in our careers will be involved in peer evaluation. And there is absolutely no room for social promotion in peer evaluation. If we don't tell the truth to our colleagues when we're providing feedback, we not only are dishonest to the people that we're evaluating, but we also undermine our own credibility. I would hope when people ask me for an opinion and I provide an opinion, and my opinion is provided with a rationale, sound examples, and if possible, I provide developmental feedback. I hope that those people who receive the feedback are able to do something. There's some action that they can do because of the feedback I provided. Without providing some kind of context and firm examples, sometimes difficult feedback can be it sounds mean-spirited. It's maybe not meant to be. But what I will tell you is if you are not honest in evaluations, it impacts your colleagues in your unit. It also impacts others across the country because hopefully if you're at this long enough and you're a full professor, people will seek your opinions out about promotion and tenure documents. And that's very important. We all in the profession rely on that. And so it is doubly important to be honest. Okay, the next tip. Listen very deeply and ask good questions. I will say, first and foremost, silence is assumed by many to be agreement. Even if someone is providing some of the most negative comments you've ever heard in your life, don't let them get by with it. Make sure that you weigh in and you say how you feel. I would also say that it is important for you to ask really good questions. Questions demonstrate an interest on your part. You are genuinely interested in what the individual is talking about. They offer the opportunity to clarify whatever's being shared. They may even stimulate some thought on the part of you or the colleagues in the room, and perhaps the person that offered up the comments. And questions also help a recipient of your questions understand where you're coming from. And sometimes when I've asked some really good questions, kind of poke some holes in probably some flawed thinking. And people have walked away realizing that maybe something was half-baked. And you know what, honestly, we all have half-baked ideas. And if you don't, you're not having enough ideas. Let's look at the third tip. Be approachable. It is not helpful to foster an environment of fear. If you want your followers, you want your colleagues around to feel that they can give you good and bad news with or without fear of reprisal, then you need to be honestly communicating with them and try to keep an even keel in your communication. Fear is an interesting emotion. It leads people over time to do essentially only what they're asked to do. They do minimums. They become on your supervision, and you don't develop people if they're operating in an environment of fear. They are not likely going to be satisfied in their position, and over time they're going to be so dependent on you to provide them feedback and direction that it's going to impede your progress. So I really encourage you to try to be as approachable as possible. Fourth tip, be professional. Be professional in speech. Be professional in presence. Be professional in dress. These are all very controllable. And unfortunately, I don't think we pay enough detail to these. For example, in speech, I see no place in the professional workplace for swearing, or losing one's temper to verbal abuse and foul language is just that, it's foul. And I don't think that it helps anyone. And in fact, if this is a behavior that you feel that maybe you're doing, I encourage you to cut it out immediately. I think it will hold anybody who exhibits that kind of behavior back. I would also say that dress is something there's little attention being paid to. I remember being told some time ago that take a look around at the level you aspire to operate in the organization and see how people act and how they dress. And as I started to look at the way other department heads dressed, I was a little flummoxed, quite honestly, because in my environment at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in the Institute of Ag and Natural Resources, I could count the number of women on 2 fingers that were in administration. But what I will tell you is I started looking broader than that. I started looking at the national meetings, and I picked up a particular style. Now, I'm not advocating that for everybody, but what I'm saying is start to determine how you need to dress so you are in at least the top half or the top quadrant of the group that you are with. You want to stand out. That doesn't mean you need to be audacious. You don't need to spend a lot of money, but do look professional. Look the part. The other thing that I would suggest along these lines is with regard to your personal and professional life, it is really important you focus on your professional life when you are at the office, when you are on the job, when you're in the laboratory, wherever you're at. Leave your personal problems at home. I realize that personal problems sometimes go with us because of the gravity of the situation. Figure out how to deal with that. Don't let them cloud you as you try to achieve anything in your professional career. Take a look at the 5th tip. Don't waste time. Call meetings that matter. Extremely important. If you're in a situation where you're chairing a committee, you're head of your department, take a look and decide, do we really have something that's worth meeting about? If you want to be considered a joy among your colleagues, be that person who can give people a gift of time. Cancel a meeting. It's powerful. Powerful. In fact, I remember years ago I was put on a committee. I was co-chair of an ethics committee in the Institute of Ag and Natural Resources. And we got together and we met several times. And this committee had met for years and they really didn't do anything, to be honest. And so we had to report back to a large group, about 40 other leaders across the Institute. And I told my co-chair, I thought we were a committee begging for purpose, and I didn't think we had one. The institution had a rigorous set of measures in place and processes in place to deal with ethics. I think all we needed to do was encourage that more people paid attention and participated in those, and we really should vote ourselves out of existence. And I made that recommendation, and indeed, we were probably one of the few committees across the Institute I ever remember that quit existing. And the vice chancellor years later, he said, you really impressed me. He said, I hardly knew anything about you. And here you come to this meeting and say, we're a committee begging for purpose. Do us a favor. Let us disband. You don't need us. And we did. And you know what? Nobody asked for us to come back. The other thing that I will say is participate in activities that stretch you. On the screen, you'll see a picture that has several books. And the Interpersonal Skills for Leadership book was a book that I referenced earlier when I said I had a USDA challenge grant that was funded. That challenge grant allowed us to develop a text that is still, parts of it are used today across the country in various departments. Probably 20 plus ag education faculty around the country contributed to the original book. I was an editor. I wrote 5 of the chapters and had several of my colleagues involved in the department as editors as well. As time went by, I just kept getting more requests, time to revise the book. And it ended up I was the only one left at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln of the 4 of us that originally were the co-editors. And, it's a little lonely when you're working on that book. And I asked myself, why am I doing this? I wish I would have asked myself sooner than halfway through the fourth or fifth edition of that book, because no longer in the classroom teaching as I had been. And frankly, I just pushed myself to complete it. I would never encourage anybody to do that kind of thing again. So ask yourself, if you've already had an experience, what growth will you get? What will matter? What will count if you repeat the experience? And sometimes you might be surprised at the answer to that. It may be time to stretch yourself and try something different. Sixth tip, establish a national network. There are lots of ways that you can establish a national network. Many of them start with something that interests to do so in your department. Let your department head or chair know that you are interested in getting to know others, and if there are some kind of regional committees that you might be on, he or she might suggest you for, that would be fantastic. The other thing that you might be able to do is just to flat out respond to some of those email requests that we oftentimes get from our professional groups asking for assistance in reviewing posts, reviewing journal articles, reviewing presentations for regional or national conferences. Very helpful and be a discussant, for example. So don't fear doing that. It's also important when you have the opportunity to go to regional and national meetings, introduce yourself to people at the same level or higher in other universities. When I was an assistant professor, I made it my business, and actually even as a doctoral student, I made it my business to introduce myself to a number of people around the country, and I very quickly developed a national network, and I'm very proud to say many of those people are still in the profession today, and I consider them to be outstanding professional friends. Okay, let's look at the seventh tip. That tip is articulate what you want. Tell people, don't be afraid to put this down on paper, tell people what you want to get out of whatever you're doing. I remember being asked several times, why would you want to participate? Or someone would say they were struggling with something and they needed some help. And I would clearly say what I wanted to get if I participated, if I helped them. And I could also say what I didn't want. Because, once you articulate what you want, you have a pretty good example of what you don't want. And it's a great sorter. I had someone ask me, how do you know when you've said yes too many times? It's when you're spending too much of your time on those things that you've said you don't want to do anymore. So quit doing it. Make sure that you don't confuse being busy with being effective, because there's a difference. If you're busy, you've got a lot of activity. If you're effective, you've got a lot of impacts. And you want impacts. Impacts will move you along through promotion and tenure. So do what matters. Now, I will say that it is highly likely the way you respond to these opportunities that are posed to you will change over time. And I'll use myself as an example. When I was an assistant professor, there were opportunities that were posed to me. Many of them were at the department level or at the college level. Then as I became an associate professor and then later full professor, those opportunities, the context changed. And they were elevated to regional, national levels, even some international service that I provided. You need to be asking yourself as you move along in your faculty career, am I increasing my sphere of influence? I think that is really, really important. And am I increasing my sphere of influence in ways that I said I wanted to grow? So you've got that congruence. The eighth tip, continue to learn. It is important that we always try to stretch ourselves and grow. And I would submit to you that it's important that you grow as much as possible in the direction your department, your college, your discipline, your university is moving. And I'll use an example. When I was in my doctoral program, And it wasn't quite the Stone Age, but for some of you it probably would seem to be close. But qualitative research was really just hitting its stride. And I was one of the first people in my doctoral program to have both qualitative and quantitative coursework, as well as some publications, and my qualitative work actually fed into my quantitative dissertation. And that was very calculated, and it was based on excellent advice I received that qualitative, even though it maybe had a rocky start and there were a few naysayers around yet, qualitative and especially mixed methods was the direction that many professions were moving toward, and that I should make sure that if I was intending to have a faculty career, I was preparing myself to adequately advise students. And so that meant that I needed to have real experience and real coursework. And I was really glad that I paid attention to that advice, and I think it served me well. Now, I don't consider myself a qualitative expert. However, I feel that I can contribute when in the past, when I advised graduate students. In my current position as Dean of the Graduate College for the 4-campus system, I have chosen not to advise graduate students, much to my dismay, because I really love that part of my career. And although I did not think it was fair to students who may need me to be an arbitrator in my role as Dean of the Graduate College. The other thing I'll say about continue to learn is know when you are of value and valued by your organization. And if you have a sense that you're not valued and there is some kind of gap, it could be a learning gap. And so I encourage you to have those conversations with your colleagues, with your department head or chair, and find out if you're having some difficulty. You know, that's what professional development leaves are for. They are grand opportunities of which I have never participated in, but I fully encourage them, and at some point I just may do that myself. But it's a great way to shift direction and to really focus. Okay, let's look at number 9, articulate a common vision. As you might have guessed from my earlier comments, it's very important for me, and I think for many others I've talked to, that our visions as leaders, as professionals, also provide opportunities for our personal life to be part of that. So there's some congruence there. I don't exactly turn a page when I think about my personal life. It's one and the same. They're integrated. And I fully wanted to start my professional career with the same people, end my professional career with the same people, meaning I wanted my family to be there for me, and I wanted to be there for them. And so that's been very important for me. Also, it's been important to develop professional relationships, friends, professional colleagues, and it's difficult sometimes to stay connected. But it's also surprising to me how a 15 or 30-minute conversation over a cup of coffee, or just a quick phone call, or perhaps an email, can keep the relationship going. It's a great touch point. They're probably struggling with the same time challenges, but it's important to have these people who can keep you grounded. They've been with you a long time. They can ask you those deep questions. They can do some probing, and they can help you sort out opportunities and possibilities. And I think that's really important. So common vision. And then the 10th tip. I have found through the years that it's very difficult for me to accept compliments. People will make a compliment to me, and I will give them all the reasons why they shouldn't compliment me. And I've finally come to realize that it's important that I accept that other people may see things in me that I do not. And when I go back and I think about some of the changes in the direction that I made, for instance, accepting when I was nominated by a colleague to be the interim department head as an associate professor. When I spoke with her, she talked about all these attributes I had, and I was kind of surprised. And, over time I started to own those. And I started listening what people were saying. And, there were enough people giving me that same feedback. I came to realize that maybe those really were my strengths. And so perception checks like these are really, really important ways to link the inside of you with what's perceived, the outside of you. Those kinds of perception checks are certainly valuable when we have what's called the 360 degree feedback, those kinds of things, or just simply talking to a colleague in the hall. So be open to the idea that other people may see things in you that you don't see. They may look at you in ways that you don't give yourself the luxury of looking. So I encourage you to think about that feedback that you get from colleagues. Now I've got the last slide that I'd like to share, and I do this. Some of it's pride. Some of it's also to share with you a little bit about who I am and how I define myself. I had the opportunity several years ago through what we call the Voluntary Separation Incentive Program at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln to talk to probably 40 or 50 faculty who were thinking about taking what I'll call as an early buyout. And I was fascinated by the stories. And in fact, if it hadn't been such a confidential experience, I would have loved to have published from it. But what I learned is I had people in front of me who said, well, when I received that letter in the mail, I thought all those emails about the Voluntary Separation Incentive Program were for somebody else. And when I received the letter in the mail, I looked at the letter and I said, oh, I do qualify. People who had been so engrossed by their work, who hadn't even thought about what's the next chapter in my life going to look like. And for some that's perfectly fine. For me, I like to say, is this a time that I need to start thinking about what it could look like to have another career, whatever that is? And so in doing that, kind of beginning with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey says, to prepare for a transition. So on this slide, you'll see there's a picture of a sweet little boy sitting on Santa Claus's lap. That's my grandson, Isaac. My husband and I have 3 granddaughters. So we have 4 grandchildren. They are the lights of our lives, and we love spending time with them. And I bought a retirement home. This is a house that I hope to live in until they carry me out feet first. And my husband and I have traveled some. I've had the good fortune to travel to 24 different countries. I hope that I someday will have another Fulbright Senior Specialist assignment or 2. But in the meantime, I'm going to enjoy raising the cattle on our ranch and farm. We raise a lot of irrigated corn and soybeans, and so I actually enjoy getting out there and helping with row crop work. I might even get my CDL license. I used to drive a straight truck a lot. I've stayed away from the CDL license. I can't really see myself in a semi, but who knows? And in the extra time I have left, I would love to do some fishing. I love to do pond fishing and just sit out among nature and enjoy life. But I share all this with you because I really believe it's important to be successful. You need to make certain that your work doesn't define you, that you define your work, that you drive your agendas, you decide what your career is going to become, and you think seriously about it, you plan for it, and you plan for a professional and a personal life that is fulfilling for you and for those around you. And if you can do that, I think that's success.
Thank you very much, Susan. In fact, some of the things you shared make me want to make sure we really are doing those. And a couple of those had to do with basically being aware of what people may see in you. And I think you bring it back a very good point. And I also think in terms of always keeping the end in mind, I think is something that periodically we all need to consider to make sure that you are moving the right direction and you are writing the right textbook or doing the right research for you. And so thank you very much for serving as one of our women role models in agricultural leadership, education, and communication. Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure.